What's up guys, in this video we're going to be taking a look at Oblivion Remastered. This is on the Z1 Extreme Ally. We're testing out 4 gigs of video memory assigned to the GPU, as well as 6 gigs of VRAM, just to see the difference there. And real quick, I wanted to show y'all, we get a warning that shows our video memory is only 4 gigs. So we only have 4 gigs assigned to the GPU, and it requires 6. And we're also short on system memory, where we only have 12 and it requires 16. And there's no way we're going to solve this since we only have 16 total, and we would need 22 to be able to meet these requirements. Here, when I switched it over to 6 gigs of VRAM, you can see the video memory warning went away, but our system memory now just shows 10 gigs out of the 16. We're going to kick off this side-by-side comparison at 1080p. We are running the low quality preset, and then we have FSR set to balance. We're also going to be testing frame generation out a little bit later. And here, kicking things off, we've got the 4 gigs of VRAM on the left, 6 gigs of VRAM on the right, and this is at 30 watts on both devices. You can see the system RAM right here if you're interested to see how much it's using. We have our VRAM, our video memory right here, and then we've got the FPS stats down here. One thing I noticed right off the bat is the average seems to be slightly higher across the board while we're testing 4 gigs and 6 gigs, so it prefers 6 gigs from what I've seen. And even freezing it right here, it's a slight difference, but it's about 1 to 2 FPS. Here we're switching it to 900p, and we're going to notice something interesting at 900p, and that's going to be down here, this frame time graph. We're getting some spikes on both, but you'll see there's quite a few more over here. And when this matters, when you see spikes, it's stuttering. So every time you're seeing a spike, there's a bit of stuttering. So it actually prefers more VRAM as well in the smoothness of the game. So you can see, especially right here, we're getting a lot of stuttering, and it's much smoother over here. And I'll pause it right here. We're getting an additional 2 FPS. All right, here at 720p, we are already above 40 FPS here. So we're going to start the counter, and you can see over here on the left, we're getting quite a bit more stuttering, especially in an area right up here. You're going to see a lot of stuttering on the left. So there it is right there. This is what we're talking about, where you'll really notice it when it does things like this. And over here on the right, really smooth, playing really well at a higher FPS. So I absolutely would recommend setting your VRAM to either 5 or 6 gigs. You could even test out 7 if you wanted. I want it because it is trying to utilize pretty much all of that RAM. And here we're at a 3 FPS difference or so. So about 2 to 3 FPS difference in favor of the 6 gigs of VRAM. And here at 720p, I wanted to test 15 watts and 18 watts. We just saw we got about 45 FPS at 6 gigs of VRAM, which is what all the future tests we're going to be running is 6 gigs of VRAM. And so here at 15 watts, we're still getting over 30 FPS. So if you're trying to save battery, you would actually be able to run 15 watts without much issue. If you want a slightly higher FPS, then 18 watts would be the way to go. But you can see here, they're both pretty smooth in the frame time graph. And here at 900p, this is 15 watts. It's right at 30, a little below 30 FPS. So you could run this, but what I'm more curious to see is changing FSR to performance. And you can see here, it made a slight difference, but not a huge difference. I was expecting it to be a bit more. The textures still look decent, but you're going to see it degrades pretty quick when we go to ultra performance. So let's go ahead and switch that over to ultra performance. Now you can see we're getting a pretty big FPS bump, but it's very noticeable how bad ultra performance looks. I don't know if you'll be able to see it through YouTube's compression, but it looks much worse even on the Ally display itself. So I'd recommend staying away from that. So let's turn FSR back to balance. I think that's what I prefer. And we're going to try out frame generation. Once again, this is at 900p, 15 watts. And you can see the frame rate is much higher, and we're keeping it where it looks pretty good. The quality is actually decent. Now, one thing to note about frame generation, it might not bother you, but it does feel less responsive. It's a bit more laggy because it's generating those frames. So your latency actually going up. But overall, if you prefer it to feel smoother, then frame gen is something you'd want on. If you prefer it to feel more responsive, I would kind of recommend keeping it off. But we did get about 49 FPS at 15 watts at 900p. So that is pretty amazing. And here we have 18 watts on the left, 30 watts on the right. This is at 900p still. I want to do these side by side to try to knock out these benchmarks a little faster. And you can see the 30 watts does make a difference, but it's not a huge difference. I was actually expecting to get much higher FPS, when we're going from 18 to 30 with frame generation. And you can see here, it's only about 5 additional FPS or so. And you can see here, we got about 55 for the average at 18 watts, 62 at 30 watts. However, this is not a huge bump. So if we go back to our 15 watts, we're at 49. So really, 15 watts seems like it would work pretty well. And then something I wanted to test is what if we go down here and we change FSR to ultra performance with frame generation on? Does that make a big difference? And here you can see 100%, it absolutely does. We're at basically 80 FPS there for a minute. I'll go ahead and fast forward through this a little bit so we can get closer to the end and actually see these averages. And even our frame time graph down here is pretty smooth, but we are averaging 80 FPS. Now, I personally really don't like the way this looks, but this is an extremely good FPS in this game. And just for fun, I wanted to see the same settings, but resolution of 720p. So we're at 30 watts, 720p, low settings, ultra performance with frame generation. And you can see the FPS is higher, but it's not that much higher. And what I think it is I believe we're being CPU bottlenecked here. Because if you look at our GPU usage, it's only at about 80%. So I don't think it's really beneficial to try to push crazy frame rates on this game. Something in the 40-ish range would probably be a better option with better visual fidelity. And I think 900p is the way to go. And also, if you want a bit more graphics, here we have it on medium settings and we have FSR to balanced with frame generation on. And you can see even with these settings, we are getting a pretty playable and good FPS. So if you don't mind the frame generation on medium settings, you can still even get in the 50s for the average. And it looks really good, much better than ultra performance. And even the shaders, the detail, and the draw distance seems to be a bit higher. So I think this is a really great way to experience the game if you don't mind that input latency. Something else that was impressive is here at 1080p, running the medium quality preset in the same settings as before, FSR balanced, frame generation on, we are getting over 40 FPS here with a pretty smooth frame time graph. So this is very playable as well, and it will look even crisper. 900p is also really close though, so that's kind of up to you what you'd want to use. So if you're wondering what settings I'm going to be using, it's going to be 900p. I'm just running the low quality preset and then FSR set to balanced. Performance still looks pretty good. I'm personally just going to leave it on balanced. And then if I'm just running around, I don't mind having frame generation on, so I'm going to turn this on. You can see here, getting an amazing frame rate. So for just running around, it's not too laggy, but if you look at the joystick, you can see there's enough of a delay where if I'm going to be using the bow, I don't want to try to aim using that. And it might not bother you at all. I'm just a little more affected by latency. But for running around, I think it looks and feels really good. However, if I know I'm going to be in a lot of combat, clearing a dungeon or something else, I'm probably going to go ahead and just turn frame generation off for myself. You can see here, we're only getting about 30-ish something, really depending on what you're looking at. Even though the frame rate's a little lower, it definitely feels a little bit more responsive. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.